All right, good morning. How's everyone doing? Good. All right. So just again to reinforce what Zach says, my background is that I run Duke University's undergraduate social entrepreneurship program. So I work with young people to try and help them take entrepreneurial ideas into the community for social impact. We're also in the process of creating a new movement within Durham to try and accelerate social innovation and entrepreneurship through an initiative called Bull City Forward, where we're trying to dramatically accelerate social innovators and entrepreneurs in this community. But as a lifelong educator and somebody who's spent a lot of time thinking about how to harness next generation talent and really challenging people to think big ideas about what the possibilities are, I wanted to share a few ideas around this question of how can somebody create a truly extraordinary life for themselves by embracing the entrepreneurial mindset. So one of the things that I've been working towards is this concept of how do we transform the concept of entrepreneurship for one of just simply business entrepreneurship or even social entrepreneurship, which are trapped in terms of entrepreneurial process, and thinking much more broadly about how do we actually move towards the idea of life entrepreneurship, taking entrepreneurship away from a process and thinking of it much more of a philosophy, an idea of intentionality, of purposefulness, of how to truly create an extraordinary life for yourself by embracing what entrepreneurship looks like. With that in mind, about 3 years ago, we embarked to write a book called Life Entrepreneurs. And the concept here is captured in the first lines of the first chapter of the book, which is challenging people to think not simply about living a life, but about leading a life, about thinking about what the status quo looks like, putting it behind them, and thinking about a new future. Entrepreneurs are people who ultimately believe that the future is malleable. How do you think about what a new future looks like and make that future a reality? In doing this, we went out and talked to 55 different people who we felt had really truly created extraordinary lives for themselves by embracing that entrepreneurial mindset. Not just in terms of their professional careers. We did talk to a number of entrepreneurs who were also entrepreneurs in the business or social context. But these were people who ultimately were able to assume a measure of risk, had a clear vision of where they wanted to go, and pulled it together. So some of the people you'll recognize, some of the people you may not recognize. So for example, what brought Cory Booker out of a Rhodes Scholarship and from Yale Law School to move to the front lines of poverty, for example, and follow his purpose and follow his passions to move to projects in Newark? How does Kevin Carroll, who's up in the left-hand corner there, come out of the projects of Philadelphia and go on to become ultimately the physical trainer for the 76ers and become the chief catalyst officer at Nike, who creates the Livestrong bands? How does that happen? How do people make that path their own? How do they go from simply living a life to leading a life? So what we discovered in terms of our research was that there was a path that began to emerge. Over 1,000 pages of transcripts in terms of the conversations we had with people, we began to see some key themes emerge. What does the entrepreneurial mindset look like? What is the path of the life entrepreneur? What we saw is that people ultimately had a very clear sense of who they were as individuals. But beyond that, they began to awake to the opportunities around them that aligned with that core identity and began to very clearly articulate a vision for the future of what their future should look like. And then once they had a clear sense of what that future looked like, they were able to pull people around them that were able to hold them accountable and support them in that journey, and then develop a set of clear goals and strategies for pulling it off. And then finally, we're able to make that leap, take that action, and recognize it wasn't just about themselves, but it was about serving others in that process. And to stay on track, they were able to embrace renewal and reinvention. And I'll tell you that that's been a very important theme for me. How do you build in these daily habits of renewal? So what I'd love to do is I'd love to share with you a little bit about each one of these steps. And not coincidentally, each one of these steps is actually a chapter in the book. And the whole idea is that we introduce an idea and then we bring in the stories to be able to share this, to be able to share with other people about how people have gone off and done exactly this for themselves. Let's start with core identity. What we discovered in terms of our research is that we had 6 informants to core identity. 3 external factors, right? So these are the factors that weren't ultimately in your control or in our control. You come from a history. You come from some type of background in terms of your people, your people's people, And trying to understand and mine that proactively and really understanding it is powerful. And one of the things that we do when we work with people in terms of life entrepreneurship is you start with a history. Start with where you're coming from, but recognize the fact that history can inform but shouldn't confine. We also have a set of relationships in our lives. Some relationships that are very positive, some relationships that hold us back. Often people will have a very specific projected idea of who we are, right? People still remember me as a troublemaker when I was 13, right? I go back to my old home community and that's exactly how they see myself. Very different than how my students see me at Duke, for example. How do you justify that and understand that, and map that, and ultimately find relationships around you that can help you along that entrepreneurial life path? Same thing with current circumstances. My wife and I have 2 young kids, right? 5 and 2. And for those of you who are parents out there, you know how dramatically that changes your life, how it enriches your life, but changes your life, right? So how do you begin to get to a place where you can appreciate those circumstances, recognize those circumstances, again, informing but not confining? Then you have a set of internal influencers. These are the things that you can control, that you should understand, you should be paying attention to. What are your needs? Importantly, what are your needs versus your wants? When we talk about Maslow's hierarchy, for example, you can eliminate some of those basic things, right? Food, shelter, security, but to get to self-actualization, you have to understand those basic needs. And what you begin to recognize is that it's not about an arms race or a materialism, right? Because you're never going to win that arms race. But it's about paying close attention to what is deep and core to you and what do you need, which has begun to be informed by this idea of passions, right? And strengths. Sir Ken Robinson, who was very popular, I think he's been downloaded 2 or 3 million times from the TEDxTalks, talks about being in your element. Your element is when you're able to leverage those strengths and fulfill those passions. When do you find yourself into that element? How do you make sure that you're maximizing your time within the concept of that element? A combination of strengths and passions. And then how do those begin to inform your purpose and ultimately your values? Right? These are the things that we have to pay close attention to. The people that we talk to as part of our conversations had a pretty clear understanding of themselves within these dynamic elements. And the more time that we're able to spend time reflecting on that, not racing from place to place, but actually saying, am I living a life in keeping with my core identity? Am I doing things that make me feel passionate and great about who I am? Am I doing things that really are able to leverage my strengths and don't pay too close attention to my weaknesses? Am I doing something that I feel is really contributing to the bigger idea of what I should be doing on this planet? By the end of the day, are you actually out there doing some things that you're really feeling good about? Once you understand the core identity then, it's the life entrepreneur who is able to be up on their toes. As Carlos Castaneda talks about being the warrior. Right? So all of us have these cubic centimeter of chances that come past us at any given time. So how do you seize that moment? How do you be like Carlos Castaneda talks about, the warrior with the speed and the prowess to pick up that opportunity? One of my favorite stories that comes out of the book is from a guy named Paul Nazrani. So Paul grew up on a farm, and he made ice cream at the end of a long day with his family. And he grew up with a dream of having his own ice cream company. Now, when you're 12 years old, having your own ice cream company sounds great. When you're 18, all of a sudden, it seems like a childhood dream. It's far away, and so you have to go do something responsible. So what does Paul go off and do? Becomes a certified public accountant. Not a very happy certified public accountant, mind you. Recognizing the fact, for those of you who are accountants out there, that some people are really passionate. Our bookkeeper is really passionate about accounting. I love that. I love having somebody who's passionate about that. He wasn't. So here he is. He's a guy who has a dream of having his own ice cream company. Actually, literally has it in his drawer in his desk, and he's working on a Sunday. You can imagine the green eye shades. And he goes off to lunch, and he comes back, and he goes by his favorite ice cream company. And his favorite ice cream store was going out of business, and in a very shady sidewalk deal, we're auctioning off, cash only, all of their stuff out of their store. And he sees this industrial-sized ice cream maker, and he's done enough due diligence to recognize it's a screaming deal. So something prompts him. He's like, it's like the hand of God telling him, Paul, it is time to start your ice cream company. He goes to every ATM machine he can find, pulls out $3,000 worth of cash, and on the spot, buys an 800-pound industrial-sized ice cream maker in New York City. He's pushing this thing down 42nd Street saying, what in the hell have I just done? But coming out of that experience, it turned out to be the catalyst for him ultimately launching something called Adirondack Creamery, which turned out to be a nice regional and very successful ice cream company. The great epilogue to that story is that a week after he goes off and buys this industrial-sized ice cream maker, he goes on a blind date. And this woman was so taken by this act of spontaneity and passion that they immediately fell in love and now have 2 children. Had he been a frustrated certified public accountant, those 2 children probably wouldn't be in this world right now. Once you have a clear sense of what those opportunities look like, right? How do you begin to articulate a vision of what the good life looks like for you? 10 years out. When we talk about the good life, we look to Richard Leider and David Shapiro. They talk about the good life being living in a place that you love, surrounded by the people that you love, doing the things that you love. What does that look like for you? 10 years' time from now, and if I'm going to come and knock on your door, am I walking up 3 flights of stairs and knocking on a door in a flat in London? Am I walking down a long dock and getting into a houseboat? Who am I seeing around your table? What are you getting ready to do the next day? What does that look like for you? Because if you have a vision of where you want to go, then you can begin to develop a set of goals and strategies to be able to get there. If you don't have that vision, then you're going to end up somewhere very accidentally. The whole idea of life entrepreneurship is about intentionality, about purposefulness, about going for something. And when you have a clear vision of where you want to go, you can begin to do a gap analysis. You can begin to say, okay, how do I develop some very purposeful, prioritized goals for myself that I can hold myself accountable to? 3 months, 6 months, 1 year out, 3 years out. Growth goals, stretch goals. What does that look like? How do you map them against everything? Personal, family, professional. And then how do you begin to allocate time so that you're prioritizing the things that are most important, but often they often get overlooked because we're so busy. We don't take time to think about where we really want to go with that same level of intentionality. Life entrepreneurs are able to do that. That's what leading a life means. That's what ultimately gets you to a point of extraordinary. And once you have a sense of what your goals and strategies are, how do you surround yourself by people who are able to support you in that path? So what you see here is an aspen grove. Right? When we first wrote the book, I thought that this was the largest living organism in the world. And I gave a talk one time and somebody raised their hand and said, actually, that's a fungus in Oregon. So it turns out the aspen grove is the second largest living organism in the world. But one of the remarkable things about it is that after a wildfire, the very first thing that comes back is the aspen tree. And the aspen tree comes back because it has such a healthy root system. So how do we create those root systems for ourselves? How do we create a personal board of directors for who we are and where we want to go? And on our research and the people that we talked to, what we saw is that there are 3 characteristics to really healthy support systems. One is that it's based on authenticity and trust. These are people who you can count on and share some of your deepest challenges, problems, opportunities, excitement. But you also want to be able to talk to people who have different perspectives on this. You don't want to just go talk to your mom and your 2 sisters about it, because they're going to go back to your 9-year-old self and give you a set of perspectives on what that looks like. You want to go talk to mentors, people who are different generations, people from different neighborhoods, different backgrounds, because they're the people who can really open you up to what those new opportunities are and hold you accountable along the way. And then how do you pay it forward? How do you make sure that there's a reciprocity that comes along with that? So that if I understand what your vision is, then I can help you achieve that, and you know what my vision is, you can help me achieve that. That's what we're trying to do now with Bull City Forward in terms of Durham. How do we create a community of social innovators that can come together in a diverse set of perspectives and open up new opportunities? That's what I love about the TED community, because it is a sharing of ideas, a diversity of ideas that we can hold each other accountable to and we can connect with, right? And once you put it all together, how do you make that leap? Being a life entrepreneur, being somebody who is willing to challenge the status quo, means assuming a measure of risk. But what do you think is the number one thing holding most people back? Failure, right? So we go and talk to 55 people about what they are most scared of. Here's the interesting thing, that a lot of the people that we talked to were not scared of failure. They were scared of regret. If you're able to shift from failure to regret in terms of where your major fears are, it is going to challenge you to do new things. Talk to new people. Get out there and embark upon new journeys that you never thought were imaginable before this. What does that look like for you, right? How do you shift from failure to regret? This is what I spend a lot of time with my students on, helping them understand what their big, hairy, audacious goals are for life. And saying, what's holding you back? What's holding you back from starting your own ice cream company? The guy who's in this picture right now, he's climbed the highest 7 summits on the 7 continents, paraglider, and he's blind. Right? If Eric and Heinemeyer can figure out how to climb Mount Everest blind, what's holding you back, right, at the end of the day? And recognizing the fact that it's not just about you. The people that we talk to were able to see that they were on this planet for something much bigger than themselves, right? That's why we're here. That's why this is a collection of really smart, interesting people coming together to think about how do we make the world a better place? How do I make your life better? How do we like people who don't have the opportunity to come to these TED Talks? How do we make their lives better? And how do we make sure that it permeates every moment of our day? So that different perspective. When I work with young people, I think that there are 3 different ways that young people approach this world. They see somebody who's homeless, for example. So if you walk down the street, I'm so happy you're here as a young boy, paying attention to what this is all about, right? The world is in front of you, and there's actually research now that says you'll likely live to 100 if you take good care of yourself. So what does that life look like for you? And if you walk by a homeless person, there are 3 reactions, right? One is walk right by that homeless person. The second is stop, chat a little bit, give a little bit of money. The third is walk a block, and as you're walking the block, after you've talked, how do you change the system so that person doesn't stay homeless for long? That's the kind of person we want to be surrounded by. That's the kind of future we need. That's what we need you for. And at the end of the day, it's not all about running. It's about unplugging, turning things off, getting out into nature, and eventually just being quiet. Finding those moments in time where you can have daily habits of renewal. Because if you're not renewing, you're not keeping your eyes on the horizon to understand where you need to go. Life entrepreneurs ultimately have a very strong sense of drive and direction. A lot of the people we work with have a path that they need to go through, so they end up in the seeker's box, right? Huge amount of drive, but a lot of questions about where they want to go. And through a process of reflection, planning, and action, you can get to a place where you can be both a warrior and a sage. Somebody who's up on their toes, ready to go after those big opportunities, as well as having the wisdom to sit back and think about where you really want to go and the kind of difference you want to make. Because at the end of the day, there is a significant dividing line between the ordinary and the extraordinary. But it's up to you to figure out which side of that line you want to be part of. Thank you very much.
Thanks for everybody.